with a dialogue session on the European governance of migration, focusing on issues at stakes and current developments. It's my pleasure to introduce Alessia Di Pascale and Patrick Doelle. Alessia is Associate Professor of European Union Law at the University of Milan, Faculty of Law, where she teaches migration law, dealing mainly with the legal profiles of immigration and asylum policies of the European Union. And Patrick Doelle is an official of the Directorate General Migration and Home Affairs of the European Commission. And he's based since 2016 at the representation of the European Commission in Rome, from where he provides migration management support to Italy and Malta. Please, Alessia, Patrick, the screen is yours. Alessia? Alessia, we can't hear you. No.
Sorry.
Okay, now you go. Thank you.
So, thank you very much, Julia, for your introduction. So I'm very happy to be here today with Mr. Doelle, who represents DG Home, so it will bring us a lot of interesting information on current developments on migration issues. So I would like to address him a few questions that we have elaborated together with the group of researchers who work or are associated to ISMA Foundation and who work specifically on European and African issues. So first of all, my first question concerns, of course, the European Pact on Migration and Asylum. The pact was presented last September, and we can say it focuses mainly on three pillars: establishing a more effective mechanism for solidarity among member states, the enforcement of EU external borders by facilitating effective identification mechanisms and linking asylum and return procedures, and improving cooperation with international partners in the area of migration management. So this package was long awaited, but it was met with mixed reactions, I will say, and it aroused much concern from civil society and academia. Particularly the solidarity mechanism that should replace the current Dublin system is not considered adequate, since it is mandatory only in some cases, even when it is mandatory, states are allowed to avoid relocation by providing other forms of assistance. I will mention that they can opt for sponsorship of returns, or they can contribute to capacity building, operational support, technical and operational expertise. Similarly, the proposal to strengthen the control at external borders through the introduction of a pre-screening mechanism and the greater use of border and accelerated procedure have raised concern. The preparation of this proposal was preceded by extensive consultation, as the Commission itself has pointed out, and we know that it was preceded by a 4-year attempt to approve the previous proposals of reform to Dublin regulation. So could you better explain the complex of divergent positions in which the Commission has moved, between which it has tried to mediate? And could you also update us on the progress of the institutional negotiations? How the package has been received by the European Parliament and the Council, and where are we with the negotiations?
Yeah, thank you very much for these very relevant questions. And first of all, good afternoon to everyone, to all the audience, and thank you very much also to the ISMO Foundation for the invitation to this event and for giving the European Commission the opportunity to provide a few insights on the proposed pact. Yeah, you already mentioned that well, the pact combines a number of important areas. Indeed, I will not go into detail to present all the elements of the pact, which are, let's say, even wider than these three main blocks you have defined. I mean, the Commission has tried to take a very comprehensive and also balanced approach on migration flows and migration management in the European Union, where you have, of course, the internal and the external dimension, and you have to find the right balance between responsibility and solidarity. So, as you also mentioned, there have, of course, been a lot of prior consultations, and we already had the experience of several years of negotiations on the previous proposals, which were put forward, let's say, during and after the so-called migration crisis in 2015, 2016. So we could, let's say, already build on several years of negotiations, which, well, unfortunately, to a large extent, have been or were unsuccessful in the sense that many of the proposals which had been put forward by the European Commission were eventually not yet adopted by the European legislator, which is on one side the Council, represented by all its member states, and on the other side by the European Parliament. So the Commission, of course, took some time to try to make a new start with the pact, to try to unblock some of the, let's say, the most contentious issues, which are in particular on solidarity, as you have already mentioned. We are, of course, fully aware that our proposals didn't please anyone. Actually, it would have been a bit suspicious if one or the other member state would have stated, oh, yes, this is exactly what we wanted the European Commission to propose. I mean, it's clear that everyone had to be a bit dissatisfied with our proposal, because at the end we try to find compromises between all the different and sometimes extremely different positions of the member states on one side, and of course also the European Parliament. And we need, of course, also to be very realistic. This is, let's say, the mandate of the European Commission with the spirit of the EU treaties. We have to propose solutions, to propose legislative instruments which also have some chance of being adopted. So we can, of course, also understand that, in particular, civil society may have been disappointed with a certain lack of ambition as they perceive it from their side. But I repeat, we need to be realistic on what can be achieved and on what can be possible compromises between the member states, which have sometimes extremely different views and needs and challenges when it comes to migration management. So if one would like to simplify a bit, and in reality, of course, the situation is much more nuanced, because each member state has its own positions on the various proposals which have been made. But you could say there are three main groups of member states. So on the first, of course, is the so-called frontline member states, which are Italy, Spain, Greece, Cyprus, and Malta, who are, let's say, on the border of the Mediterranean, and which are, let's say, in the first line when it comes to most of the migratory flows. And therefore have also a huge burden to carry in this regard, and who therefore request, rightly so, more solidarity from the other member states when it comes to shoulder this burden. Then you have on the other extreme side, if I may say, the so-called four Visegrad countries, so Czech Republic, Hungary, Poland, and Slovakia, who have, over the negotiations in the last years, taken very clear stance that, for instance, they are absolutely opposed to any form of mandatory relocation within the European Union. So this is for them simply a red line, which does not mean that they are necessarily opposed to solidarity as such, but they would like them to express the solidarity through other means, but not through mandatory relocation. And then you have, let's say, the majority of other member states, of course, also with divergent views among them, but broadly speaking, they are, let's say, also agreeing, of course, with mandatory solidarity, including relocation, but in turn for more controls at the EU's external borders. Also because what they fear in particular are the so-called secondary movements. And so this would be, let's say, migrants and as the preceding speaker already explained, I mean, there are many migrants who arrive in Italy who don't have any intention to stay in Italy, so they just move on to the other member states in the north. And you can see that over the last years, countries like Germany or France, they had 5 times as many asylum applicants as Italy. Italy is almost at the bottom when it comes to the number of asylum requests per capita in Europe. So other member states consider that Italy, even if migratory flows have again increased since last year, but are still very, very far from the figures we have seen in 2015, 2016, that Italy is not considered by them as being under migratory pressure. So the perceptions can be very different from between the member states. And then, of course, there's also the European Parliament, who generally takes a more rights-based approach. So is, of course, keen to ensure that asylum applications are performed in a consistent and respectful manner. Is, of course, also in favor of solidarity, even if it seems from the current negotiations that the new European Parliament may not be in favor of an automatic redistribution system within the European Union, as was the case with the previous European Parliament, who adopted a position in that sense back in 2017. So it is very clear from these different positions that a proposal from Commission side to propose a mandatory relocation, mandatory redistribution system within the European Union, where all migrants arriving in frontline member states would automatically be redistributed, would have absolutely no chance of being adopted in the European Union. So the Commission had to propose a much more nuanced proposal, which takes into account these different positions, and where it's also clear that solidarity, in particular relocation, is the other face of the same medal, which also includes more responsibility, which means more controls at the external borders. And this explains also then the assistance of many other member states on providing for a mandatory border procedure.
Sorry to interrupt you, since unfortunately I have limited time. And do you have the impression, as an officer of the Commission, that this strategy is having success? Do you have the impression that this attempt to mediate will have a good impact on the attitudes of member states?
Well, to be honest, I mean, what we have seen until now is, unfortunately, to a very large extent, just a repetition of the same positions which we have seen already over the last years before the proposal of the pact. And this is, of course, not very useful. I mean, we continue to insist with member states that, I mean, we understand all the positions, all the concerns, but the status quo is not an option. It is bad for all member states. It's bad for the European Union. It gives a very bad image of the European Union of being completely divided on this very important issue. And all member states need at some stage to compromise. And we are, of course, in frequent contact with member states at the Council. We are negotiating with the European Parliament. So negotiations are making slow progress, but there's already progress. So we hope on one side that maybe with the European Parliament still this year they may adopt, let's say, the first positions on some of the proposals. And when it comes also to the member states, we hope that at least with some of our proposals, which actually had already been made even before the pact, for instance, the proposal back in 2016 for a new EU asylum agency, which would, let's say, be an improvement compared to the current EASO, European Asylum Support Office. That this could already be adopted, hopefully this year. So just to show also that at least there's some progress with the pact, slow progress, and where then trust could be also rebuilt. It's to a large extent also a matter of trust between the member states. So we need to rebuild this trust so as to move ahead and also on the other more difficult elements of the pact and to achieve the right balance between responsibility and solidarity. And of course, the Commission proposals can be improved. We are absolutely open to improvements and suggestions from all sides, including civil society. But it's also clear that it will have to be a combination of all these elements I described.
Okay, thank you very much. So since you mentioned EASO, I have a very quick question on EASO. Since we know that one of the main critical issues of the common European asylum system is the divergent approach in member states. Unfortunately, there are still huge differences in the application of the instruments currently into force. So the European Commission, one side, had proposed to replace them with regulations that should limit the discretion of member states, and on the other side had proposed to strengthen the role of EASO. So the proposal was also submitted in 2016. And in that regard, I would like to ask you concerning the advancement of the negotiation process. Do you think, as you mentioned, that there could be a more positive attitude from member states in that regard? And concerning the funding that should be allocated to properly provide EASO with the resources to carry on an effective support work to member states.
Thanks. Yeah, no, indeed, EASO, or the future European Asylum Agency, has of course a key role to play also in the proposed system. What is of course of fundamental importance is to ensure also a harmonized asylum system throughout the European Union. To ensure a high level of protection in all member states, and this in turn would then certainly also contribute to reduce the so-called secondary movements, where what is sometimes called asylum shopping, where migrants move from one country to the other because they hope that there they may have more success in requesting asylum, and this of course clogs up the system and creates then all the issues with the current Dublin regulation. And EASO has, or the new European Asylum Agency, has a key role to play in that. So if this proposal should be adopted, and there is some hope that member states now may find a compromise on that, so this would be a first step towards, let's say, the adoption of the pact. That then, of course, the agency would have additional powers and additional means to contribute to the strengthening of the asylum systems in the member states through its operations on the ground, as in Italy, through training, capacity building, and let's say promotion of best practices. And of course, through the development of various tools, statistics as well. So everything which can support, of course, the member states in their various tasks. And in anticipation already of the creation of the agency, the Commission has considerably, let's say, the European Union on the basis of Commission proposals has increased the budget of EASO, the number of staff, which was recently increased from 370 to 500 in anticipation of the agency. So this would, let's say, be the staff certainly required as a first basis. But then in case of the adoption of the agency regulation, we would also see then the creation of a new asylum reserve pool, which would be constituted of 500 additional experts to be made available by the member states, and which could then easily be deployed to the member states who are under pressure, whose asylum system is under pressure, as is currently also the case with Italy, and which would then certainly facilitate also the work of EASO or the future agency on the ground, and would therefore also be to the benefit of the front, in particular the frontline member states such as Italy or Greece, who benefit a lot from EASO support. And in order to make that happen, the budget has now also been considerably increased. So for next year, it will be almost 150 million euro just for EASO to cover all the different needs and expenses.
Just a very finally quick answer concerning the cooperation with third countries and Africa, particularly how the Commission plan to involve African countries and so the countries of origin and transit in the management of migration on one side, and to address the root causes of migration very quickly.
Yeah, no, and indeed, in the external dimension, which is also the area where member states seem to converge much more in their views and positions. It's more on the internal dimension that we have a lot of difficulties to overcome. No, for the external dimension, the Commission and the EU has always promoted a comprehensive and balanced approach as well. So where sometimes, okay, the indication is if the EU would only be obsessed with readmissions, this is certainly not the case. As is also clearly indicated in the back. So we are promoting with all our partners throughout the world a very comprehensive partnerships on migration and mobility, which of course promote on one side the development cooperation to tackle the root causes of migration, so to reduce also the incentives for irregular migration, to promote legal pathways, including legal migration, but also resettlement as possible means to reach Europe. We promote, of course, also the fight against organized crime, such as migrant smuggling and trafficking in human beings, so to fight against organized crime networks which are behind these phenomena. And of course, in our partnerships, we also try to promote strengthened readmission and return, which is, from the point of view of the European Union, of course, also an indispensable element of our relations. And of course, this is not, let's say, a part which is, or where some of our partner countries show indeed certain reluctance to cooperate. This is why also we are promoting these comprehensive packages, and the European Union is also trying, let's say, to use other policies to achieve, let's say, better results in this area, be it commercial policy, but for instance also visa policy, where the Commission has adopted last February a first report on the basis of the new provision in the visa code, where an analysis has to be made on the cooperation on readmission, and where then the EU may possibly decide already this year on reducing, for instance, visas for certain third countries who are reluctant to cooperate on readmission.
Okay, thank you very much for providing this very broad overview of what the EU is planning to do and the status of negotiations, if I understand well, for the moment is not advancing so much. So we will see in coming months where we'll be. So
thank you, Mr. Doelle. It was very interesting, and thank you, Alessia Di Pascale, for this dialogue. Now I'm talking to the audience. If you have questions to Patrick Doelle or Alessia Di Pascale, this is the right time to write it in YouTube and Twitter chat box. And of course, you have touched upon so many big issues that it is not easy to sum up it, and probably not even pose in question, because we now we see quite clear how this migration governance really is a testing ground for Europe in its effort, for the European Union in its effort to build itself a political authority, although the limits, of course, it has in dealing with the member states. We have a question from the audience. Does the EU have specific initiatives in mind to cooperate with African countries of origin on readmissions?
Yeah, no, thanks for this question. Yeah, which I think I tried also to partly answer. So indeed, it is clear that well, African countries may be reluctant to readmit their nationals, even if the principle, let's say, of readmission has been enshrined also in the Cotonou Agreement, which was signed between the European Union and all African, Caribbean, and Pacific countries. But in order, let's say, to promote also these readmissions, so on one side, certainly it is important to promote legal migration and legal pathways also for these African citizens, as I said, to reduce incentives for irregular migration. So to offer more possibilities to come legally to Europe for those who want to work or who want to study in Europe. And the pact is also proposing in this regard the so-called talent partnerships, which we will now pilot with some of the Northern African countries, let's say, to promote also legal migration towards Europe. Then, of course, there are other tools such as the development cooperation, but also the visa policy I just mentioned. As it is normally an obligation to readmit your nationals, well, if this country remains reluctant to do so, then to a certain extent the EU may decide, if I may call it like that, to retaliate and to say, okay, then we will be much more restrictive when it comes to our visa policy with that country, and this may already be applied as of this year. Then, of course, it was also very important when it comes to readmission to support then the reintegration of the persons who are returned to that country. Whereas one may always think about forced return, actually there are many migrants who, after a while of being in Europe for whatever reason, would like actually to return also to their home country. For that, there are a number of programs on assisted voluntary return, which are in place in the EU member states, which are also supported by the European Union through our funding in the member states, but then also the third countries, because then it's of course also important to ensure that these persons are well reintegrated into their communities. And this goes along with, let's say, support which is provided to the whole community and not just to the migrant in question. And where it's also necessary, let's say, to to promote a certain form of dialogue with the communities, to make also sure that these migrants are not necessarily stigmatized if they return to their original communities. A lot of experience has already gained in this area, but this is something on which we will further step up our efforts, and where the Commission, whether we will also propose by the end of this month a new strategy on assisted voluntary return.
Thank you very much, Patrick.